This episode was inspired by a brief interaction that I had with an acquaintance a while back who was newly on a GLP-1 medication to lose weight that really sent me down a protein rabbit hole. This person told me that they were eating a lot of protein to ensure that they wouldn't lose muscle as they lost weight. However, I was also aware that they were not exercising. Let me be clear, I have no judgment for this person. They were taking steps to improve their health with the information and the resources that they had at the time. But my knee-jerk reaction as a trainer to hearing about prioritizing protein without exercising to maintain muscle during weight loss was, that's not how this works. You have to challenge your muscle through some sort of activity to signal your body to maintain or build muscle. For more background on this process, listen back to Protein Part 1, our previous episode. But being the good little nerd that I am, I took a step back and dove into the scientific research to answer the question, was this person maintaining their muscle by eating a protein-forward diet without exercising during weight loss? Keep listening to find out what I learned. This is the StrongHer Collective podcast, and I'm your host, Morgan Auberg. In this podcast, we talk about all things women's fitness, from training specifics to myth busting and everything in between. In this space, we are challenging the cultural narratives that have, for many years, told women to be smaller instead of stronger. This is a place where I cheer you on and lift you up as you cultivate your strength inside and out. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, don't forget to subscribe and rate the show. This really helps the algorithms send it out to new people. If you're on YouTube, subscribe and hit the bell notification button so that you never miss an episode. Let's get stronger together. Before we kick it off with some nerdy research, just a little housekeeping. First, this is part 2 of a 3-part series all about protein. To get more protein basics, what it is, how it functions in your body, and general guidelines about how much protein to eat, listen back to part 1. I'll link to that in the show notes. This episode is all about how protein impacts muscle mass during weight loss specifically. And then in part 3, we have some myth busting to do. We'll talk about how protein is not fat burning in spite of what the V-Shred guy might have said. And if you don't know who the V-Shred guy is, all I can say is that I'm really happy for you. Don't change your behavior on the internet. You're in a good spot. Second, StrongHer Collective has always been about strength, not shrinking, and that hasn't changed. This is not a weight loss podcast, and the goal here is never to tell women that their bodies need to be smaller to be worthy or to be healthy. At the same time, weight loss is something many people navigate for a wide range of reasons, and ignoring that reality doesn't actually serve our strength or our autonomy. This episode is about what happens to muscle, the tissue that gives us strength, independence, and resilience when the body is in a calorie deficit, and what protein can do and also cannot do to protect that muscle. Whether or not weight loss is a goal for you, this conversation is ultimately about preserving strength. If weight loss is not a goal for you, this episode may still be useful because it helps explain how muscle responds to stress, underfueling, and protein availability. And if weight loss is a goal you're navigating, this information can help you protect your strength. If this topic doesn't feel supportive for you right now, you're always welcome to skip this one and come back for the next episode. Now that we've got all of that out of the way, let's dive in. First, I'll outline why preserving muscle during weight loss is important. Then we'll get into some research about protein intake and muscle maintenance in a calorie deficit. If you're a longtime listener of this podcast, you already know that I'm a huge fan of muscle. Going from skinny to strong absolutely changed my life. Muscle is amazing, and here's why. Beyond helping you move through your daily life, muscle slightly increases your resting metabolic rate, the amount of energy your body uses at rest to maintain essential functions like breathing, circulation, and brain activity. While muscle doesn't dramatically boost metabolism, having more of it does raise your baseline energy needs and supports long-term metabolic health. When you eat carbohydrates, glucose enters the bloodstream and is either used for energy, stores as glycogen in the muscles and liver, or if energy needs are met and storage space is limited, eventually it's converted to fat. During longer, intense workouts, running low on glycogen in the liver and muscle is a big reason people bonk or hit a wall. Having more muscle increases your capacity to store glycogen and improves your ability to pull glucose out of the bloodstream, making your body more efficient at managing blood sugar. In short, more muscle helps you move through daily life with ease, burn a little more energy at rest, store glucose efficiently, and preserve energy for workouts. What is there not to love? When in a calorie deficit, generally bodies lose fat and muscle in a combination. But how much muscle are we talking about here? In a 2023 study, researchers sought to find out how much muscle people lose and create a prediction model based on their findings, which basically means that they sought to use math to predict or estimate how much muscle people would lose when they're losing weight in general. The researchers used a sample of 415 men and 482 women who were not participating in a structured exercise program. Importantly, the researchers did not report macronutrients, so we don't know how much protein participants were eating. We only know that they were in a calorie deficit, which means that they were consuming fewer calories than they were burning for energy. For the sake of argument, let's assume that on average, participants were eating a standard amount of protein. The researchers found that for every 10 kilograms, which translates to 22 pounds, of weight lost without exercise, men lose about 2 to 2.5 kilograms of skeletal muscle, which is about 4.5 to 5.5 pounds, or 20 to 25% of the weight lost. And women lose about 1 to 1.5 kilos of skeletal muscle, which is 2.5 to 3.33-ish pounds, or about 10 to 15% of the weight lost. Like I said, the study didn't look at macronutrients or diet at all, aside from calorie deficit, which is a huge limitation when trying to apply results to individual situations. But what happens when we add protein into the mix? There's an interesting meta-analysis that compared changes in body composition when people were on standard protein versus high protein diets. Whiteley and colleagues took data from 24 studies with 1,063 total participants for this analysis and included studies where calorie amounts and fat amounts were matched between groups. So standard protein and high protein groups were eating the same total number of calories and the same amount of fat. This allowed researchers to really look at protein as a variable. Across studies, the researchers found that the high protein diets performed better in maintaining lean body mass, and presumably participants were not exercising because the researchers excluded any studies that included structured exercise as part of the protocol. On average, across all of the studies that were included in the analysis, participants lost 0.43 kilograms less of lean body mass when they were eating high protein diets compared to standard protein diets. This doesn't mean that eating protein while in a caloric deficit will preserve all of your muscle, but it does suggest that you will lose less muscle than if you were on a lower protein diet. This is really good news for my acquaintance who is prioritizing protein without exercising on a GLP-1. One limitation of this meta-analysis is that the data was not broken out by gender. If you remember back to the 2023 study that looked at amount of muscle lost by gender, researchers saw a range of 20 to 25% of weight loss is muscle for men and about 10 to 15% of weight that women lose as muscle. So while the meta-analysis that found people will lose an average of 0.43 kilos less of skeletal muscle when on a high-protein diet compared to a standard protein diet, it is reasonable to assume that this will vary from person to person based on their gender and a ton of other factors that weren't isolated in this research. Another limitation that I identified when looking at the study results was that all of the research studies included used populations with pre-existing health conditions, including overweight, obesity, pre-diabetic, heart failure patients, and so on. Findings in this study might be true for healthy individuals at any age, but the research doesn't tell us that. Remember that science is incremental, and each study is like one little dot in a pointillism painting. Slowly, very slowly, a picture is beginning to emerge, but this study is just one small dot on our huge canvas that is muscle and weight loss. It's also worth talking about the size of a calorie deficit. There's a review from StrongHer by Science, which, if you aren't familiar with them, contains the nerdiest fitness blog of all time that I highly recommend. I'll link to that in the show notes. And this review suggests that the relationship between calorie deficits and muscle gain is gradual, not all or nothing, which makes a lot of sense. Very small deficits, around 200 calories per day, may still allow some muscle gain, particularly in people who are newer to resistance training or have more body fat to lose. As the deficit increases, the body becomes less able to support muscle growth. Around 300 calories per day, gains slow significantly, and by 500 calories per day, muscle gain is usually fully blunted. This doesn't mean muscle can't be maintained in a deficit, especially with adequate protein and training, but it highlights that building new muscle requires energy, and larger deficits, like those caused by GLP-1 medication, come with clear trade-offs. So to bring it back full circle, what did I learn? I was a bit too quick to jump to judgment with my acquaintance sharing about a protein-forward diet while on a GLP-1. According to the research, higher protein diets do help preserve muscle loss during a calorie deficit. On the other hand, muscle is still being lost. That was shown in all of those studies. And resistance training is a great way to reduce or mitigate muscle loss. That being said, too much of a calorie deficit makes it really hard to build muscle. My best advice to someone engaged in dramatic weight loss is to make sure that they have a really strong care team. So that would be your physician prescribing a GLP-1 or other weight loss medication. That would also be a registered dietitian, or at the very least a nutrition coach, to support an individual in getting the nutrients that they need. And then the third and equally important piece of that puzzle, having a fitness professional involved to add resistance training to really bolster muscle maintenance, if not muscle growth. And there you have it. If you learned something new in this episode or have any questions about protein or training, I'd love to hear from you. I'm on Instagram at strongher.collective. That's StrongHer.collective. In the next and final installment of the protein series, I'm going to bust the myth that protein is fat burning. I mentioned this in the beginning of the episode. If you've run into the V-Shred guy on YouTube or social media or other fitness grifters, chances are you've heard all sorts of outlandish claims about eating to optimize your metabolism and other nonsense, including that eating protein will burn fat. We'll talk about what's really going on and arm you with the information that you need to make decisions about your nutrition that will support your strength. Don't forget to follow the show so that you never miss an episode, and check out the links in the show notes if you're interested in training or nutrition coaching. Until next time, let's get stronger together.